My name is Whitney Cole, and I was 29 years old when my family finally shattered. The night I told them I was expecting a baby should have been one of the happiest nights of my life. Instead, it became the night my mother punched me in the stomach and screamed that my child had no right to exist. I was 11 weeks pregnant. A few hours later, I was lying in a hospital bed, staring at a tiny heartbeat on a monitor and trying to stop my hands from shaking. I thought that was the worst thing that could happen. I was wrong. Because 20 minutes after my mother hit me, someone rang the front doorbell. A woman was standing outside. She was a complete stranger. And she had my face. Not similar features, not a slight resemblance. She looked exactly like me. That moment changed everything. I grew up in a house where every morning felt like an inspection. My mother would stand near the stairs with a cup of coffee in her hand, while my sister Chelsea and I came downstairs. Her eyes would scan us carefully. Chelsea always received attention. A strand of hair would be fixed. A collar straightened. A smile of approval. I received only a quick glance before my mother moved on. As a child, I thought being ignored meant freedom. I thought I was lucky because nobody watched what I ate or how I dressed. Years later, I realized the truth. I wasn't free. I had simply been disqualified. My mother had already decided that I wasn't important enough to invest in. There was a yellow measuring tape in our kitchen drawer. Every Sunday evening, my mother measured Chelsea's waist and wrote the number down in a notebook. She never measured me. That hurt more than I understood at the time. Our family owned a bridal boutique in a small Indiana town. The shop was beautiful. Cream-colored carpets, gold mirrors, and rows of sparkling white wedding gowns. My mother, Sandra Renner, was famous there. People adored her. Brides traveled from neighboring counties just to be dressed by her. Chelsea became the face of the store when she was still a child. She modeled dresses, appeared in advertisements, and stood in front of cameras. She looked exactly like our mother. I did not. I worked in the back. I unpacked boxes. I steamed dresses. I was invisible. One day, when I was 9 years old, I overheard a customer compliment Chelsea. "She's absolutely beautiful," the woman said. My mother smiled proudly and replied, "In this family, pretty is the rent." Everyone laughed. I didn't. Because even at 9 years old, I understood what that meant. I wasn't pretty enough to pay. I remember asking my mother once where my face came from. She looked at me for a long time before saying quietly, "Not from my side." Then she changed the subject. At the time, I didn't realize that sentence would become the key to my entire life. My father was a pharmacist who worked night shifts. He was a gentleman, a quiet man. He loved us in small ways. He left slices of pie in the refrigerator. He fixed broken things while everyone else slept. He never yelled, but he also never stood up to my mother. He stayed silent. For years, I thought his silence meant peace. Eventually, I learned it meant fear. One night when I was 12, I found him sitting at the kitchen table with an old green tackle box. Inside were dozens of letters. He quickly closed the box and placed one finger to his lips. I nodded. In our family, keeping secrets was normal. I wouldn't discover what those letters meant until 17 years later. Escaped my hometown through nursing school. For the first time in my life, I was valued for something other than my appearance. Hospitals didn't care what my face looked like. They cared whether I noticed a patient getting worse. They cared whether I stayed calm during emergencies. I was good at both. I met my husband Ben in a hospital parking lot after his old car refused to start. We laughed while connecting jumper cables. Then we went for coffee. Then another. Then another. Eventually, I couldn't imagine life without him. We married in a small outdoor ceremony. My mother attended and spent most of the evening criticizing my dress. Chelsea quietly held my hand under the table during dinner. At the time, I thought she was simply emotional. I didn't know she was barely holding herself together. Because my sister had spent 3 years trying to have a baby. 3 years. 4 rounds of IVF. 4 heartbreaks. And my mother had turned her dream of becoming a grandmother into a family obsession. She openly talked about the first grandchild. She planned for it. She expected it to come from Chelsea. Then I got pregnant, and everything changed. The dinner that changed everything. When I discovered I was pregnant, I didn't tell anyone right away. I wanted to protect the moment. Ben and I sat in our bathroom staring at the positive test like it was a miracle. Then Ben started crying. Not quietly either. He sat on the floor, laughing and crying at the same time. "We're having a baby," he kept saying. "We're really having a baby." I smiled, but inside me another feeling had already appeared. Fear. Because I knew my family. I knew exactly what this baby meant. To me, it was our child. To my mother, it would be something else entirely. It would become a competition. The first grandchild. And according to my mother's plans, that child was supposed to belong to Chelsea. Not me. We waited until after the first ultrasound. The tiny heartbeat appeared on the screen, fast and steady. 11 weeks. Everything looked perfect. I finally decided it was time to tell my family. I planned the announcement carefully. Sunday dinner. Everyone together. Witnesses. My mother behaved better when other people were around. At least, that's what I believed. I even wrote notes beforehand. I planned exactly what to say. I planned how to redirect attention toward Chelsea so she wouldn't feel hurt. I thought I had prepared for every possible reaction. I was wrong. The moment we walked into my parents' house, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere felt strange. Chelsea's eyes were swollen as if she had been crying. Paul sat beside her with his arm around her shoulders. My father barely looked up from the roast he was carving. And my mother was smiling. Too much? I knew that smile. When she was truly happy, she relaxed. When she was furious, she became strangely cheerful. The brighter her smile, the darker the storm underneath. I suddenly wanted to leave. I squeezed Ben's knee under the table. It was our signal. Not tonight. But Ben didn't understand. He had been carrying our secret for 11 weeks. He was excited. Proud. And proud people sometimes don't see danger. Dinner continued. Then my mother looked at us. "You two seem awfully happy tonight," she said. Ben smiled. I saw it happen in slow motion. He lifted his glass. His mouth opened. "Actually," he said, "we have some news." I felt my heart drop. "I'm pregnant," I said quickly. Silence. Complete silence. Then something unexpected happened. Chelsea stood up. She walked around the table. And she hugged me. Tears filled her eyes. "Oh, Whitney," she whispered. There was sadness in her voice. Pain. But there was also love. At that moment, despite everything she was going through, she was happy for me. I will never forget that. My father looked like he was about to cry. For once, he looked directly at me instead of at my mother. He smiled. Then my mother stood up. Her face had changed. She looked furious. "You chose today?" she asked quietly. "I didn't know," I began. "You chose today?" Her voice grew louder. She pointed toward Chelsea. "After everything your sister has been through?" I froze. I had no idea what had happened. Then Chelsea looked down, and I understood. Another IVF treatment had failed. That very day. My mother wasn't listening anymore. She was shaking. "4 treatments!" she shouted. 3 years of trying, and now this. She pointed toward my stomach. "The first grandchild belongs to Chelsea." The room went silent. Then she screamed, "It has to be hers." Before I could react, she walked around the table. Fast. Too fast. Ben stood up. Paul stood up. Nobody expected what happened next. Neither did I. She grabbed my shoulder. And then, she punched me. Hard. Right in the stomach. "Get rid of it!" she screamed. Pain exploded through my body. I couldn't breathe. I fell from my chair onto the floor. My hands instantly covered my stomach. All I could think was one thing. "The baby! Please let my baby be okay." Around me, everyone was screaming. Ben was between us. Paul was holding my mother back. Chelsea was crying. And then I heard something I had never heard before. My father shouting, "Sandra, enough!" The entire room froze. I looked up. My mother was staring at me. For the first time in my life, she looked afraid. Then, the doorbell rang. Nobody moved. It rang again. 2 soft chimes. The strangest sound I had ever heard. My father slowly walked toward the front door. He opened it. A woman stood outside. She looked to be in her 60s. Silver hair. Gray coat. A small travel bag. And my face. My exact face. I stopped breathing. Ben stared at her. Chelsea stared at her. Even my mother looked terrified. The woman slowly looked around the room. She saw the overturned chair. She saw me on the floor. She saw my mother. Then she spoke. "Hello, Sandra?" Her voice was calm. Cold. 36 years later, she said, "and you're still the same person." My mother turned completely white. The woman looked at me, then back at my mother. "Who gave you permission to touch that girl?" Nobody said a word. Finally, my father spoke. His voice shook. "Whitney, this is your Aunt Renee." Aunt? I had never heard that name before. Then I felt something warm. I looked down. Blood. I was bleeding. And suddenly nothing else mattered. Not the stranger. Not my mother. Not the secrets. Only one thing mattered. My baby. As Ben picked me up and rushed me toward the door, I heard Aunt Renee say something softly behind us. A sentence that would change my life forever. "She has my face because she's my family, and you've been lying to her since the day she was born." The woman with my face. The drive to the hospital felt endless. Ben kept one hand on the steering wheel and the other on mine. I couldn't stop looking at the small spots of blood on my clothes. Every terrible possibility raced through my mind. What if I lost the baby? What if one moment of anger had destroyed everything? I sat there with both hands over my stomach, silently begging my child to hold on. The emergency room staff moved quickly. As a nurse, I had worked in rooms like this countless times. But being the patient was completely different. I hated every second of it. The waiting, the uncertainty, the fear. Finally, the ultrasound machine was rolled into the room. I held my breath. The technician smiled. "There it is," she said softly. A tiny heartbeat flashed on the screen. Strong. Steady. Perfect. I immediately burst into tears. Ben cried too. For several minutes, neither of us said anything. We simply stared at that little heartbeat and thanked God. The doctor explained that I had suffered a minor injury and would need rest, but our baby was okay. I had never felt such relief in my life. Then came the question, "Can you tell me how this happened?" I froze. My entire childhood had trained me to protect my family. Don't talk about family problems. Don't embarrass your mother. Keep everything inside the house. The lie almost came automatically. I fell. The words sat on my tongue. Then I looked at the screen again, at that tiny heartbeat, and suddenly I knew I couldn't lie anymore. "My mother punched me," I said. The room became quiet. I explained everything, every detail. For the first time in my life, I told the truth without trying to protect anyone. The next morning, there was a knock at our door. It was my father. He looked 20 years older. His shoulders were slumped. His eyes were red. He carried two things: a container of scrambled eggs and an old green tackle box. I recognized it immediately. The same box I had seen when I was 12 years old. The one filled with letters. Dad sat at our kitchen table and slowly opened it. Inside were dozens of envelopes. Some looked ancient. Some had colorful stamps from different states. He carefully picked one up. "I should have shown you these years ago," he said quietly. I waited. Then he finally spoke. "You have an aunt. Her name is Renee." I frowned. "I've never heard of her." "I know." He swallowed hard. "Your mother made sure of that." He explained everything. 36 years earlier, my mother and Renee had stopped speaking. Completely. My mother removed every photograph of her. She never mentioned her name. She acted as if her sister had never existed. But Renee had continued writing to my father every single year. Christmas cards, birthday cards, letters. He had saved all of them. "Why?" I asked. He looked ashamed. "Because I didn't know what else to do." I realized then that my father had spent decades living in fear. Not fear of violence. Fear of conflict. Fear of standing up. Fear of losing the peace, even if that peace wasn't real. A few hours later, Aunt Renee came to visit. Seeing her up close was surreal. She looked so much like me that it felt like looking into the future. Even her smile resembled mine. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. A faded Polaroid. Two young women stood beside an old car. One was my mother. The other was Renee. I couldn't breathe. The woman in the picture looked exactly like me. Every feature. Every detail. "This was taken in 1989, Renee said softly. I kept staring at it. All my life, I had wondered why I didn't look like anyone in my family. Suddenly, I had my answer. I looked like her. Renee sighed. Our mother judged us every day, she said. She measured our bodies, compared our looks, ranked us. I listened in disbelief. She smiled sadly. I wasn't considered pretty enough. She looked down at the photograph. Your mother was the beautiful one. For the first time, pieces of my childhood started fitting together. The comments, the comparisons, the constant focus on appearance. It hadn't started with my mother. It had started long before her. Generation after generation. Pain being passed down like an inheritance. Then Renee looked directly at me. You remind me of myself. I smiled a little. She shook her head. No, sweetheart, that's not a compliment. I frowned. She gently touched the photograph. You spent your whole life trying to earn love from someone who doesn't know how to give it. Her words hurt because they were true. Then she said something I will never forget. Do not let your daughter inherit this story. I looked down at my stomach. For the first time, I truly understood. This wasn't just about me anymore. I wasn't protecting myself. I was protecting my child. A few days later, the rumors started. My mother had already begun telling people her version of events. Apparently, I had become dizzy. Apparently, I had fallen. Apparently, my pregnancy hormones had made me emotional. The entire town started whispering. Some people believed me. Many didn't. I realized something painful. My mother had spent decades building her reputation. I was simply the daughter no one really knew. But this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. I requested copies of my medical records. I documented everything. Every note. Every report. Every detail. Then I placed them inside a folder. Ben looked at me. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, I closed the folder. I'm going to protect myself. And that was the moment I decided to take my own mother to court. For almost a week, I didn't hear from Chelsea. I wasn't angry. I understood. Her world had just fallen apart too. She had spent years trying to have a baby, years trying to make our mother proud, and now she was caught between her loyalty to Mom and the truth of what she had witnessed. I didn't know what she would choose. Then, late one night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. Can I come over? 10 minutes later, she was sitting in my kitchen. She looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. Like someone who had been carrying a heavy weight for years and finally couldn't hold it anymore. I made tea. She didn't touch it. She just stared at the mug. Finally, she looked up. I don't think I can do this anymore. I knew exactly what she meant. For the first time in our lives, we talked honestly. No pretending. No protecting Mom. No family rules. Just the truth. You always thought I was the favorite, Chelsea said quietly. I nodded. Because you were. She laughed bitterly. No, Whitney, I was the project. I frowned. The project? She nodded. Everything I did had to be perfect. She looked down at her hands. When I gained weight, Mom noticed. When I got a bad grade, Mom noticed. When I dated the wrong guy, Mom noticed. When I cried, Mom noticed. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. You know what she never noticed? I stayed silent. Whether I was happy. The room became quiet. I wasn't the favorite, she whispered. I was the investment. Then she told me things I had never known. Even as an adult, our mother still commented on her weight. She still controlled what she wore. She still decided which dresses she modeled in the boutique. Even the IVF treatments had become part of my mother's plans. She scheduled my appointments around the store's events, Chelsea said. I stared at her. What? She nodded. The spring wedding season. The fashion shows. The advertisements. Everything had to fit Mom's schedule. Everything. Even pregnancy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Then Chelsea said something that broke my heart. When my fourth IVF failed, she hugged me. She swallowed hard. And then she said, "Please don't disappoint me again." I felt tears sting my eyes. No daughter should ever hear those words. Not from her mother. Not from anyone. For years I had envied Chelsea. I thought she lived in sunshine. I thought she was loved more. I thought she had everything. I was wrong. She'd been trapped just as much as I had, only in a different cage. I had been ignored. She had been controlled. Neither of us had been loved the way daughters should be. Chelsea finally looked at me. Do you know something horrible? What? When Mom hit you? She paused. For a second, I wasn't shocked. I stared at her. She started crying. Because I've spent my entire life waiting for something like that to happen. The words hung in the air. I knew she loved us only when we gave her what she wanted. She wiped her eyes. And you didn't. Silence. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. I'm going to testify. I blinked. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Chelsea. No. Her voice became firm. I'm done protecting her. The next morning, I met with my lawyer. I handed her the medical records. I explained everything. Then I told her that Chelsea was willing to be a witness. My lawyer looked genuinely surprised. The golden child? She asked. I nodded. She slowly smiled. That changes everything. A few days later, my father arrived at our house. He looked nervous. He sat down and took a deep breath. I need to tell you something. I waited. I'm going to testify too. I stared at him. He had never stood against my mother. Not once. Not in 35 years. He looked ashamed. I spent my whole life staying quiet because I thought I was keeping the family together. He shook his head. I wasn't keeping it together. I swallowed hard. What were you doing? He looked at me with tears in his eyes. I was helping it stay broken. Neither of us said anything for a long time. Then he added softly, I'm sorry, Whitney. It was the first apology I had ever received from him. And somehow it mattered. We officially filed for a protection order. The paperwork felt heavy in my hands. Petitioner Whitney Cole. Respondent Sandra Renner. Mother and daughter. Against each other. I never imagined those words would exist on legal documents. But there they were. The truth in black and white. Then something unexpected happened. A few nights later, my phone buzzed. A message from Chelsea. Only 4 words. I'm proud of you, sis. I stared at the screen for a long time. Because in our family, we didn't say things like that. We didn't encourage each other. We competed. We compared. We stayed silent. But now everything was changing. For the first time in our lives, my sister and I weren't standing on opposite sides of our mother's expectations. We were standing beside each other. And together, we were finally telling the truth. Neither of us knew what would happen in court. Neither of us knew whether our family would survive it. But one thing had become clear. The cycle was ending, even if it broke our hearts. And the hardest part was still waiting for us, because my mother wasn't ready to let us go. Not yet. The courtroom was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I stood there with one hand resting on my stomach. My mother stared at me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of disappointing her. I wasn't trying to make her proud. I wasn't trying to earn her love. I was simply trying to protect my child. The judge looked down at the documents in front of her. Then she looked back at us. Based on the evidence presented, she said calmly, the protection order will remain in effect. My mother didn't move. She didn't speak. She just stood there. Then slowly she sat down. I expected anger. I expected shouting. Instead, she looked tired. For the first time in my life, she looked like someone who had lost. Not a court case. Not an argument. Something much bigger. She had lost control. A few minutes later, the hearing ended. Everyone slowly began leaving the courtroom. My mother stood up. She picked up her purse, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the door. She never looked at me. She never looked at Chelsea. She never looked at my father. She simply walked away. The sound of her heels echoed through the courtroom. Click. 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 Then she was gone. And just like that, an entire chapter of my life ended. The moment the doors closed behind her, my legs started shaking. Ben wrapped his arms around me. I finally let myself cry. Not because I was sad. Not because I had won. But because I finally understood something. Sometimes protecting yourself means grieving someone who is still alive. Sometimes love means walking away. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to keep repeating the same pain. My father hugged me next. It was the first time I could remember him initiating a hug. "I'm sorry," he whispered. I looked at him. "You don't have to." "Yes, I do." Tears filled his eyes. "I should have protected you years ago." I squeezed his hand. Neither of us could change the past, but at least we were finally being honest. Then Chelsea walked over. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Then she laughed through her tears. "I guess we're going to have to learn how to be sisters now." I smiled. "I think we're late getting started." She smiled back. "But at least we're starting." I hugged her tightly. For years we had been standing on opposite sides of our mother's expectations.